Hello everyone. So, I have finally finished the epilogue for Xenoblade X Definitive Edition. Now, I can talk about it. I've got a pretty decent amount of stuff to say about it. So, let's just get right into it. First things first, this video is about the epilogue for X. So there will obviously be spoilers about what happens in the epilogue. This video is technically a two-parter to the first video where I talked about the base game, so I left spoilers out of that video, but it's actually impossible to keep spoilers out of this video due to the nature of it. I advise you to watch that video first though. If you want to hear my thoughts on the epilogue and just the epilogue, then that's fine too. Alright, so let's just get right into it. How did I feel about it? I thought the epilogue was alright. It definitely surprised me in more ways than one, like several different ways. I thought that the epilogue would be taking place mainly on the new continent that they showed in the trailer, and that we would be focusing on a lot more of the mysteries of Mira, but that kind of didn't happen. Instead of exploring more of the mystery of Mira, the whole epilogue is basically just having to escape Mira, as the entire universe is basically being consumed by giant black spheres. I do think it was a pretty sick concept, and I was happy to see the things that I did see. But I was kind of wishing that we just didn't end up leaving Mira so soon. Like, we as in the player, in the game, and in real life, connected with Mira. Just for us to be like, shit, we gotta get off this damn rock. The plot revolving on why they had to leave was still pretty interesting to see. However, I will have to admit, the main reason why I was so excited to see how the plot unfolds was mainly just to see how Xenoblade X connects to the rest of the Xenoblade games. One of my favorite story moments in the other games is seeing how the games connected with one another throughout the playthrough, because even though it seemed like they weren't connected at all, they ended up being connected. Playing through 2 for the first time and seeing it connect to Xenoblade 1 was a fever dream, and I thought it was impossible just because of how different the games were. Back on topic, I wanted to see how Monolith Soft was going to connect X to the main universe. There have been so many theories that X was connected directly to the main universe, and shockingly, we actually got several things confirming or not confirming those theories. We got an official confirmation on whether it takes place in the same universe as Xenoblade 1, 2, and 3. No, X is officially not connected to any of the other games in any way. The references are purely just references. In Future Redeemed, they mentioned a Project Exodus and other things, and it seems that Project Exodus mentioned in Future Redeemed and the Project Exodus that is in Xenoblade X are two completely separate projects. However, they did manage to have another lore bomb that completely shook me, and I did not expect that at all. I'm talking about parallel dimensions. They introduced the concept of parallel dimensions because the main plot point revolves around those parallel dimensions. I've had my own theories, but I just completely forgot about parallel dimensions. Like, when I was watching the cutscene, and then when they were explaining the concept, they showed off like little snippets of like Xenoblade 1, Xenoblade 2, and Xenoblade 3. And I was like, what? Seeing that the other games were at least acknowledged was great. And I did kind of wished that they were mentioned more, but I could see why they weren't. Before I get ahead of myself, I need to introduce you to a new character that was introduced in the epilogue. In the main game, they referenced a great hero who saved everybody before they crashed on Mira. Someone they believe to be dead. Well, he's not dead. The new character, Alois Bernholt, is basically the main character of the epilogue, because quite literally everything revolves around him. His skull, the Ares Prime, is basically an all-powerful source of power recreated by Elma's people, and with that power, it apparently has the power to travel the multiverse. That pretty much makes him the strongest Xenoblade character, because I don't think anybody else could do that. Alois, or Al for short, didn't actually die. He just disappeared into the rift between dimensions. He was stuck in the rift for a while, but then managed to escape. He met up with everyone in NLA and hatched a plan to book the human race to a new universe, because this one is just getting erased from existence. And the whole cause of that is because of the ghosts. These giant purple thingies from the trailer. The ghosts are basically identical to the Gnosis that show up in Xenosaga, so it's safe to assume that they're probably the same entities. They are the unknown entities that show up with these DMAT events. They are also partly responsible for the destruction of Elma's homeworld and Earth. Another thing to mention is that the universe that Earth was in, it's technically a completely different universe. They're in a completely different universe for Mira. Mira and Earth are in completely different universes, which I think is pretty cool. After a whole bunch of stuff, they learn about, more things that happen with the DMAT events and all of the ghost stuff, and then lo and behold, ta-da! The main antagonist finally shows up. Void. Void is an ancient being that basically just comes out of nowhere and is just like, I'm gonna kill you guys, alright? Cool? Cool. Void, like I said, is the main antagonist of the epilogue. And Jesus Christ, Void makes Z from Xenoblade 3 look like the best antagonist in the entire series. He is such a weak antagonist, character-wise. I did not care for him at all. And when we defeated him, I was like, okay, cool. That kind of sucked. I was over-leveled, so, there's that part, but even then, I was just like, that fight sucked. We didn't even learn anything about him until after we had already killed him. And then it turns out that Void is one of the most important things to happen in this universe. The epilogue ends with the White Whale 2 traveling into another universe. At first, I thought that they teleported to the combined world at the end of Xenoblade 3 Future Redeemed. But after watching the scene again, I think that it's actually the planet that is at the end of Xenosaga 3. Because the combined Earth at the end of Xenoblade 3 doesn't have any rings circling it, while this planet at the end of Xenosaga 3 does. Which honestly is pretty fucking sick. This can either lead to a Xenosaga Trilogy remake, or maybe even a new Xenosaga game. Who knows what they're cooking up. One thing that I didn't mention is the Ares Prime itself. I was wondering why this skull has so much power and the ability to cross the multiverse. Al mentioned this in the final cutscene of the game, and that the Ares Prime is powered by the one and only, the fucking conduit. It all makes sense. Okay, so after that somewhat bad, brief description of the epilogue, what do I think are the pros and cons of the epilogue? Let's start with the pros first. I think the pros of the epilogue are that they end up tying most of the loose threads that they teased at the end of the base game story. Like the end game cutscene, with Lao and that black hooded figure. And instead of Lao being recruited into Organization 13, Lao ends up waking up in some random place that wasn't explained very much, and the mysterious hooded figure was Al all along. And it turns out that this was in the middle of Al trying to find his way back to the White Whale. I've always wondered what they were going to do with this scene, and honestly, I'm kind of fine with the result of it. Another plot point they addressed was Elma's backstory and the context behind the destruction of Earth. I really did like that they addressed most of the plot points that they left from the base game's ending. Overall, I do think that the epilogue storytelling is much better than the base game storytelling, but not by a whole bunch. You could tell that there was a lot of the modern day Monolith Soft storytelling, but I also feel like that they had to somewhat limit themselves because this is still Xenoblade X at the end of the day. So they probably had to fit it in the way of X's storytelling. Now, it's time for some of the cons. Some cons that I have are honestly kind of silly and honestly really just skill issue based. Let's start with how you go along with the story. A major problem I had with the main story was that there was a bunch of stupid requirements, like having to be a certain level or having to complete separate affinity missions in order to progress through the story. I talked more about that in the other X video. Unfortunately, the problem persists, even in the epilogue. In order to progress the story, you have to do the affinity mission to recruit the lion dude in your party if you didn't already do that, and you also have to do Al's affinity mission too. Why are these things separate? I just ignored them because I wanted to do them later, but no. They're required for the main story. Like I said before, if they're required for the main story, why aren't they just already part of the main story? I don't get it. I think it's a stupid feature, and I'm sad that it's in the epilogue as well. This part is mainly a skill issue on my part. The ghosts are pretty cool enemies. I like the design of them, and I like how they're involved in the story, but Jesus Christ, they are annoying as fuck to fight. You have to specifically target a part of their body that is shining in order to do damage. It shouldn't be a problem, but for me, it was, because it was surprisingly hard to tell which one was the right one to target, because they just kept moving. I also hated how 99% of Volataris' enemies can be fought only using Skells. Skells are cool and all, but I didn't really work on them too much, so I was actually kind of struggling to kill any of the enemies. Once again, this one is just a skill issue, and honestly, my fault. Speaking of Volataris, when seeing it for the first time in the trailer, I thought that we would get a new area that we could permanently explore, but we get to go there in like the last 30 minutes of the game, and it's an absolute bitch to explore. Most of the time it's just flying around in your Skell trying to find your teammates and activating like 6 giant pointy spears in order to weaken the enemy. The cool new area sucks. I hated it and I wish that they used it more. It was cool for like 5 minutes before I just got tired of it. One final thing that I hate is that the reason why everybody's consciousness stayed in their Mimia's own bodies, even though the servers were destroyed when they crashed on Mira. When they crashed on Mira, it wasn't explained like at all. Personally, it was like the number one thing that I wanted to know, besides the whole connection stuff. And getting such a horrible answer kind of pissed me off. And then, at the very end of the game, they just brush it off and then never go back to it. They just don't question it. They mention it for like a second, and that's about it. The epilogue seemed to be a story-focused part of the game, which is good, because I felt that X needed that, because the overall story was just so weak, in my opinion. I thought the story aspect of the epilogue helped the main story a lot, and made the story more enjoyable overall. And I enjoyed having things that I was wondering about explained to me. Seeing the whole parallel dimension thing was probably the biggest thing. However, in terms of the gameplay aspect of the epilogue, nothing really changed from the base game, and honestly just added to the frustrations that I had before. I wasn't expecting the gameplay to completely change, but I just wish they did a little bit more. It seems like with X, they can't really find a balance between gameplay and story. It's either one or the other, it seems. I still enjoyed the epilogue overall, and it added to my experience of the overall game. In the previous video, I gave X Definitive Edition an 8.5 out of 10. With the epilogue done, I've decided to bump the score up to a 9 out of 10. Xenoblade X may be my least favorite Xenoblade game, but I still love this game to death, and I will sink hundreds of hours into this game like I did with the others. Not every Xenoblade game can be perfect, however, every Xenoblade game has its strengths and its weaknesses, and X is no exception to that. Now, one final thing that I have to say to close out this video. How's it poppin'?